A rebel rugby league is on the horizon. Backed by billionaires and fronted by Mike Tindall, R360 could change the game forever, or it could crash and burn. But the real question is, should World Rugby get behind it or try to shut it down? Let me explain why I think they should sanction it despite not being in favour for the league. R360 is an all but announced rebel rugby league, set to kick off in 2026. The plans are to take 8 men's teams and 4 women's teams on tour around the world to places like New York, Barcelona and Dubai, in the same way as F1 or the current 7 series does. And it apparently has already had 160 players agree to join it. It seems to be entirely commercially driven and will be made up of brand new teams nobody has ever heard of, and it has been accused of abandoning rugby tradition and its core fan base. But should World Rugby just ignore it and call it out for what it likely is, a cash grab, or should they sanction it? Let me explain why I think they should still sanction it despite my lack of interest in it, even though it seems like the unions are against it anyway. Now personally, I think people are overreacting to it just a tad. If we heard that the MLR all of a sudden had multiple billionaires owning teams and were throwing money around at players, I'm not sure we would have quite the same reaction to that as we are to this. I think people wouldn't be happy, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure we'd be talking about the end times of rugby. I think people are just a bit put off by how different it is to rugby now. I personally have no interest in it, but my first thought when hearing about it was, well, if Scotland players can still play for Scotland, I don't really have an issue with it. And maybe I have a different perspective to some of the other fans, as 1, the league is meant to run from April to September, so it doesn't really intersect the Northern Hemisphere international season, which hosts home internationals in November and the 6 nations in February and March. Even though the first season is meant to start next October, which doesn't really match up with that, so to be honest, I'm not quite sure what they're doing here. Whereas if you're a Southern Hemisphere rugby fan, it's basically on during all of your country's home matches. And 2, my country already allows players to play for them and play club rugby abroad. What's it to me if Finn Russell is playing for Bath or the Dubai Warriors, or whatever the teams will be called? He already doesn't play here. But ultimately, I do think there is a threat to the normal rugby structure. It threatens how current leagues work and potentially the funding of them by creating a new market for TV rights. But I think it would be worse if the league isn't sanctioned than if it is. Now, if you put down your pitchforks, I can explain. The way I see it is there are 4 scenarios for how R360 could play out. The first is that it's sanctioned and is unsuccessful. In that case, the players make a big payday, keep playing for their national teams, allegedly, and then when the house comes tumbling down, they all return to the normal structure. Now, club rugby might get hit by it slightly, and if it is successful, then we have another professional rugby league that's hopefully playing within World Rugby's rules by following law changes and releasing players for international duty, and current clubs would just have to get used to it. In the other scenario, where it's unsanctioned and unsuccessful, it's not that big a deal. The players that get to play in it, like the alleged 160 who have already agreed contracts, wouldn't be able to play for their country, and then when it comes crashing down, they return to the current structure in a similar way to what happens if players leave to try their hand at League, AFL or the NFL, just on a much larger scale. It might be a bit annoying for a bit, but overall wouldn't be that big a deal. But what happens if it's unsanctioned and is successful? It's entirely commercially driven. So do you think they would come crawling to World Rugby asking to be sanctioned after that? Not a chance. They would just get in the way of all their money making. The only reason they want sanctioning now is for legitimacy, which for me is really the only valid argument I've heard against sanctioning it, as without it, they might not even get off the ground, as it might scare off investors. But if they are successful without it, then they've made their own legitimacy. They don't need outside acknowledgement anymore. This shift in balance could set a precedent that commercial forces can drive the game independently of World Rugby's control. And what could that mean for other ventures in rugby? Would they seek approval after that? This could rival what happened in 1895 when the Rugby League was formed. And just like with the league, R360 will no doubt start making law changes to try and increase viewership. And in 15 to 20 years, we can now have 3 distinct codes of rugby, and unlike Rugby League, this new model would already be structured with global reach and fan acquisition in mind. And on top of that, what could this mean for the traditional game? If top players are drawn to R360, international rugby could suffer in terms of both quality and marketability in the long term. That in turn might affect TV deals, fan interest and revenue streams that unions rely on to sustain the professional game. Many clubs are already dependent on union support, so the knock-on effects could be disastrous. In my opinion, sanctioning a project like this would at least keep World Rugby involved in shaping the future of the sport. Leaving R360 completely outside the system risks losing influence over rugby's future, and that's a far greater challenge than simply dealing with big contracts. The way I see it is if it's sanctioned and unsuccessful, it's no big deal. The same as if it's unsanctioned and unsuccessful. But if it's successful and sanctioned, at least there would be a moniker of control that World Rugby would have, and theoretically players would still be playing international rugby. And stuff like the Six Nations and World Cups would still have the best players in the world in it. But if it's unsanctioned, we don't get any of that, and it's Wild West rugby. And who knows what could come of that. Thanks for watching.